Hello, July 2nd, 2020. I'm Pastor Rusty. This is the Daily Inspo. Well, it's a little bit late in the day, but I want to talk to you a little bit something I've been studying on all day, and it's Jesus and some of his parables. We're going to talk about the parable of the wedding banquet today. But first, let's set the context. Jesus has told two other parables, one about the two sons, where he said, go out and work in the vineyard. One said he would, and he didn't go. And the other one said he wouldn't, but he then felt his conscience pricked, and he went and worked. And Jesus asked, so which one of those was righteous? And it was obviously the one, even though he said no, he went anyway. And then he told the story of the wicked tenants that, the king or the master had bought a field and put a press in it, put a wine, put grapes in it, and it was time to collect the grapes and all. He sent his workers and the people, the tenants that were there, beat the workers that came, and then he said, I will send my son, and they killed his son. And he asked, so what do you think the king's going to do? And everybody said, well, he's going to go and kill those tenants, and then he's going to get more tenants that'll give him the grape harvest when it comes in. And so everybody knew that Jesus was speaking about the Israelites at that time and how they were rejecting the truth and who Jesus was. And so he tells one more parable. Now, it's in the same vein as all that. But listen, it says, once more Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his slaves to call those who had been invited to the wedding banquet, but they would not come. Again, he sent other slaves, saying, tell them, those that were invited, look, I have prepared my dinner. Oxen, my fatted calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet. But they made light of it and went away, one to his farm, one to his business, while the rest seized the slaves, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged, sent his troops, and destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then he sent his slaves to the wedding feast is ready. Go to those invited who are not worthy. Go therefore to the main streets and invite everyone you find to the wedding banquet. So Jesus is telling another parable, and it has everything to do with Israel rejecting the Messiah. And then Jesus is revealing that we're going to open up the wedding feast to those that will come. And so they go into the streets and they compel these people to come into the wedding feast. It's all ready. And so they come in, both good and bad, into the wedding hall. Now, here's the interesting thing. In that day, the king, the master, whoever it was at that point, everybody that came into the wedding feast would get a wedding robe. They would get a robe, and it basically made everybody's state and standing the same. So they would come in, and they'd all look alike. They'd have these wedding robes on. Well, later on, as the day goes on, it gets dark outside, in comes the king, and he looks around at all the guests, and he sees one guest without a wedding robe. And he says, friend, how is it that you're in here with no wedding robe on? Because he knows the wedding robes were provided at the door, and that all they had to do was willingly receive the wedding robe and come on in. But this one person did not. And so he asked him, how are you in here without a wedding robe? And what's going on here? And the guy was speechless. And then we read where the king said to his attendants, take this guy, bind him hand and foot, throw him in the outer darkness, and where there's going to be, gnashing of teeth and all those, and weeping and gnashing and all that. And it says, then he sums up the entire parable, the entire section of parables, the last three parables. It says, for many are called, but few are chosen. Now, this leads a lot of people into a lot of, I believe, to be strange theological substances and excuses and reasoning behind all this. But let's look at this. Let's just go back and look at what's actually said by the parable. The king comes in. The feast has happened. It's all going on. He comes in to present himself to the guest, and he looks around, and all the guests are wearing a wedding robe except one person. He knows it was offered. He knows this person rejected the wedding robe. So he said, friend, how'd you get in here without that? The guy had no answer, because here's the bottom line. This guy, if we're going to assume the wedding robe represents righteousness, and we're going to assume that the banquet represents, the end of time and all the guests that were invited. And here's the thing. Who was invited? Well, first of all, the people were invited ahead of time, and that would be Israel, and they didn't want to come in. They didn't want to come into the kingdom of Christ. They didn't want to come in through the sacrifice that Christ was going to offer. They wanted to come in on their own history and their own traditions. They were good enough. Well, here we got a guy sitting here who came into the wedding feast, and he didn't want the wedding robe. He felt like his works were good enough. He felt like he could just be himself, and God's going to accept me for the way I am, or this king is going to accept. But see, he disregards the prince. He disregards the king. He disregards everything going on, and he simply says, I'll make it in on my own. And the king says, you can't be here this way. And so the king takes him and casts him out. And most commentators will say this is a picture of the lake of fire or hell or torment or punishment, how you want to work that. But here's the main thing, and that's why I want to look at that one guest. Let's look at that guest. He had the opportunity and he rejected it. He was offered a wedding robe and he said no. He was offered what would make him wedding feast ready. And he, of his own free will, let's go back and look at it. His own free will was issued by the first guests that were invited. Their own free will, they said, we don't want to come. The second set of their own free will, they said they didn't want to come. This third set of their own free will, they were willing to come. But this one guy came in and he was, of his own free will, decided not to take a wedding garment. And so we see a picture here of rejection. The free will is utilized and it's rejected. And I think the greatest picture here is Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. If we're not robed in the righteousness of Christ, we're not welcome at the wedding feast. And I think that's the picture here. The picture is when we humble ourselves and bow our will to His will, then we're made righteous by Christ. And that's the picture. Remember, this is the day the Lord has made. Let's rejoice and be glad in it. I'm Pastor Rusty. I'll talk to you later.